are in listen-only mode.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Baker with Firestorm. We're in scenic Atlanta. We'd like to welcome you good people up in Rochester. The webinar today that we're talking about is sponsored by the Rochester Business Alliance. This is session 9 of the Crisis Coach series that is presented in conjunction with Firestorm. We're talking about active shooters and armed intruders, which is a timely subject that we have today. We invite you to become our Facebook friend, Firestorm Solutions on Facebook, and you can follow us on Twitter at Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag for the session. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risks and crises. Firestorm has expertise in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communication, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We do have a disclaimer from our attorneys here. The presentation is not complete without accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product we're discussing must be read and considered in conjunction with your organization's personal counsel. However, this information should not be considered or interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. The Rochester Business Alliance is our co-sponsor in this series of the Crisis Coach. Today we're discussing active shooter, armed intruder. Our presenter today is Jim Satterfield, the president of Firestorm. Firestorm.com is where you can go to watch past webinars, register for future webinars, and you can follow all of the previous webinars, the recordings of them in this Crisis Coach series. You can also download white papers and other kind of interesting stuff we have at Firestorm.com. The series today is underwritten by our good friends at the Rochester Business Alliance. We have online Chip Dawson. Chip, over to you, please.
Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everyone. We've got good attendance this morning, an interesting topic, I'm sure. And welcome to the 9th in the series of the Crisis Coach. The Business Alliance is delighted to partner with Firestorm to bring you, our members, this critical 45-minute discussion by Jim Satterfield. Jim is one of the country's top crisis managers, and he's covering the subject of active shooter, armed intruder. While it may only make the local or regional news, it's safe to say that somewhere in the United States every day, someone with a gun will enter a workplace or a public location and be successful in taking one or more lives. At least once a week, the event will make the national news. Over 32,000 people in the United States die annually with the help of a gun. Many are suicides, and many more are battles in high crime areas. However, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that there were 405 workplace homicides due to shootings in 2010. To last year, we have data available. Are you ready? Have you ever had someone threaten to shoot you? I have, but he didn't have a gun at the time. It's scary. When it actually happens, it's too late. The gun threat is serious, and survival depends on plenty of advanced planning. That's what Jim will be helping you with today. He's been through it many times. Listen carefully to Jim for the next 45 minutes. What he says may save your life and the lives of others in your organization. And now here's Jim.
Chip, thanks. I appreciate those great words and insights, and it is a topic that unfortunately is in the paper today and on the news and on the television and talking about things. We're seeing an uptick both in businesses and schools and being concerned about this particular issue. I've also invited this morning Harry Rulin to join us. He'll be joining us during the webinar and providing some of his insights. Harry is another founder of Firestorm and has been helping the Littleton schools with the shooting that occurred there and the Roswell, New Mexico. And as you probably all know, Firestorm is on retainer with Jefferson County. That's Columbine. And Harry's office is out in Evergreen, Colorado, as we look at it. So as we think about all of these topics, we always give an update to talk about what we're seeing in the news and what we're experiencing. And I think Chip did a good job of sharing with us a bunch of the things that were occurring already that we're around. And we've seen in the last few days the shooting in Las Vegas. where some individuals killed 2 policemen at a pizza location, then went into the Walmart, were confronted by a citizen who they killed, and then they retreated through the Walmart and committed suicide on the back side. The Seattle Pacific University was a Christian liberal arts college, and they had an attack there where young men came in and started shooting, and while he was reloading, another student took that individual down with pepper spray, and they were able to restrain him. We see the University of Santa Clara just a few weeks prior with the shootings that occurred there and the attacks that came in. One of the comments that I would make about those 3 shootings, and we're going to spend a lot of time today around this subject, is other people were aware that the individuals involved were troubled. Other people were aware that there was concern in their life at this point in time, and they failed to take action. And that led to empowering this individual and those individuals to be able to take the actions that we've seen and witnessed on television. We hear a lot about see something, say something. And we're going to hear a little bit later as we talk today that that's easy to say. It's hard to get people to come forward. Anonymous reporting is a key element into these equations as we look at it. We're not going to do a lot of statistics today, and many times we give you that background information to look at. But I want to talk about these 3 just for a minute, and the fact that the statistics are that there is leakage when there's someone who has ill intent to take place, someone that's thinking about committing suicide, someone that's thinking about a hostile act. And we're seeing that there's a linkage between those that want to take suicide and then they want to try to create it as suicide by cop in that process. And 80% of the time, at least one person was aware that the individual was a threat. And over 66% of the time, 2 people were aware. You want to create an environment where that knowledge comes forward so that you have that intelligence to be able to act and to plan. The Minnesota team strategy is an example of that. A lady was washing dishes, looking out her window, and observed a teen going into a storage area where these little mini areas that you can rent to store your supplies and furniture and excess goods, and it didn't look right. So she called the police, and the police researched and found that the teenager had been planning for over a year an attack on his school. In addition, he'd made pipe bombs and had multiple guns and ammunition, and he was going to create an explosion and fire in one area to draw the first responders and fire to that area, then attack his school and die in a blaze of glory associated with it. Because she said something, and this was found, the event never took place. And that's the area that I'd like to have you think about today as we talk about all of these subjects. The FedEx shooting in Atlanta that occurred just a few weeks ago, a disgruntled employee who came back in and shot. And some people felt that it might have been a joke that he was talking about those things, and I want to leave you today with the fact that it's never a joke as we think about those aspects associated with it. We do searches for clients, and through social media, that's one of the things that Firestorm does. Social media risk is the fastest growing risk facing organizations today, but the term school and gun is used well over 60 times a day somewhere in the United States. And that information is out there, and there's information about your company and your organization out there that you will need to know. When you see individuals that there's a potential of concern for, then it's time for behavioral threat risk assessment. We have a large number of people on our webinar today from the HR field, the human resource professionals that are there and looking at it. And that's an area to think about within your company, about what your policies and procedures are, and we'll share some insights about that also. So unfortunately, today's topic is a topic that we don't have to wait for the webinar to see. It's played out on the nightly news every day. And as Chip talked about earlier, we're seeing these stories on local levels and rising up when they're of sufficient size to grab the attention of the media. this is a situation that none of us want to be in, to have to pick up that phone and call a family and say that their loved one's not coming home from work today. And that's an area that we want to think about. So as we think on this subject, we've talked a lot in our previous webinars, but to come back, and I think it's doubly true when we talk about an active shooter, when we talk about an armed intruder, to follow the predict, plan, perform process. You need to understand the vulnerabilities and threats, what their impacts are, how you monitor, and the triggers for action to activate your plans. And that is where this whole predict area can be the biggest benefit for you when we're focused on these types of individuals. And then the plans could be security in your locations, the behavioral threat assessments, the social media monitoring, the anonymous reporting aspects of it. All of those elements of your plans come together. Each one of your organizations should have a workplace violence plan in place. And we're seeing today that across all companies, about 1 in 3, those plans are driven and directed by the HR professional within the organization. So that's another area to think about as you're looking at your objectives for 2015 as we move well through 2014. And then finally, under the perform, it's the training. It doesn't do any good to have a plan if everybody doesn't know it. It doesn't do any good to have a plan if you don't test it, if you don't exercise it, if you don't go through those elements associated with it. There are some supplies that you need to have in place, and then there is obviously the structure to make those decisions in a crisis. We are a fairly large employer of retired Secret Service agents, and one of the statements that we've heard from them on repeatedly occasions is that when seconds really matter, the police will be there in minutes. So as you think about that, think about what are the plans within your organization, within your company, within your school, to have the ability to react in a timely manner, to buy that time so the police can arrive and help and provide assistance. And so that's really what our focus is today, is to help you. What actions do you need to take, and then how can we start to identify that we're at risk from a particular individual at a particular time. As we move forward, there are warning signs. And if you look at these types of events, there was a book written by 2 Harvard professors called Predictable Surprises. And almost every disaster, incident of school or workplace violence or act of terrorism was preceded by warning signals, and those signals were missed. And so being aware of what's going on in your environment becomes an absolutely critical one. That's where the see something, say something aspect comes forward. We would all rather hear about something that we should be aware of than to miss it and then have it escalate to become an act of violence associated with it. So in your organization, think about what would the warning signs be. And we can talk about Tier 1 and Tier 2 behaviors and escalations. There was a webinar that Firestorm did just a few weeks ago around anticipating human behavior in a disaster or an emergency. And if you have a chance, that's probably a good one to go to the Firestorm website and look at it on demand. But as you look at this, what are the triggers that are feeling in pressure? Chip mentioned that he'd had an individual who confronted him the other day, and what happens is you've got someone that there's finally a tipping point. You look at all these individuals and shootings that we've just been discussing, and there were tipping points in each one of those where they came together. If you see someone who's experienced loss, who has had financial difficulties, who's had relationships that have deteriorated, who's had a death in the family, as those pressures start to escalate, then as they become multiple, then you start to see changes in behavior. People coming to work late, people being more argumentative in meetings, small issues becoming major issues to them. All of those are warning signs. And that's an entire discussion in a webinar series that we can do separately to go through of how you anticipate those and then identify them. But instead of it just being your job within the organization, it becomes everyone's job within that organization. And we don't want to turn on the nightly news and see your firm being highlighted. So the comment that I made earlier about when seconds and minutes count, when you're prepared, you gain something very valuable, and that's the time. We've started our webinar series in talking about a time machine, and your plans become your time machine. Unfortunately, I don't own a Jules Verne time machine, so I can go back in time. My time machine only allows me to move forward 1 second, 1 minute at a time. As you look at that, if your people don't know what your plans are, if your people haven't practiced it, if they're not familiar with it, if you haven't tested it, if you don't have any of those doubts, you will have problems that occur. As you think about it, you don't want to force someone to try to make a decision on the fly to understand what they need to do next. That is going to buy you the most time. Now, we'll share with you the standard report response protocols in just a moment. But if you think about it, there are only two options that you have in these types of areas. Those are to stay or evacuate, to remain or to flee. What we have to do then is to tell people, what does that mean? How does that work? And when do I know which action to take? And your communications become very critical associated in each of those areas. So as we're thinking about it, there are a lot of threats and risks. If you have an individual that you see potentially that you're concerned about, that's where the behavioral risk assessment and an intervention there can prevent that gun from coming to work. We would rather help you, and you would rather help within your own organization before it got to the point where someone felt the only answer was that gun that they had to take an action for, to come back and deal with it. Chip mentioned that Firestorm has had a lot of experience in dealing in these areas, and unfortunately he's very right. From the shootings at Virginia Tech, the worst example of workplace violence in the United States history, to other schools, to terminations, to disgruntled students, to grudges that have occurred. We've seen it. We've been there. We've talked about it. The one commonality is that everyone there would have done whatever they could to have prevented it if they had known. And that's really what I would like you to take away today from our talk. So having an armed guard at your door, having everyone armed to be able to respond to the intruder, we would rather this not become a shootout at the OK Corral. Are there times for the intervention? And when the police are coming, those are great things to have at this point in time. But if we can prevent the gun from coming to work, that's going to make the biggest difference. And making sure that people know that they have other options to handle their grievances. If they feel like they didn't get promoted or they got terminated or that there's other pressures in their lives, that's a responsibility that we all have to each other every single day. So how's it done? You need to have a framework, an overarching policies to define the goals of your program. What is it that you're trying to accomplish in pulling those activities together? We talked about anonymous reporting. We talked about training your people, having a written plan, exercising those plans and putting them together, having an area where we're focused on protecting life and health. All of those areas become absolutely critical for us at each step along the way. So establishing that framework and integrating it into the culture of your firm is a great one. And we like the word preparedness as opposed to the word safety or security. Now, are they security plans? Are they contingency plans? But it's a preparedness. It's a culture that I'm looking out for you and you're looking out for me, and we're in this together. Now, as we talked last month in the Anticipating Human Behavior one, Steve, our expert in the area, individually reported that the statements that you see here, people really don't want to be sitting ducks. They want to feel that they have some control over where they are. If we'll give them actionable information, you'll find that your employees will respond, and they will make reasonable decisions and take those actions when they're needed. If you're silent on this subject, and you don't train your people, if you don't give them the instructions, you're putting them at a significant disadvantage. So I'd like to encourage you that this is a topic that's appropriate to talk about. We even see it's a topic appropriate to discuss when we're talking to schools and children. We can explain them and not have them be frightened to make a difference. If it works in a school, it'll work in your business. The I Love You Guys is a nonprofit that was founded a number of years ago by a family who lost a child in an event that similar to what we're discussing. And so as the research, they came up with that there are 4 things that can happen. There are 4 actions, and this is called the Standard Response Protocol. Now, when we discuss standards and best practices, and Firestorm always recommends that you align your plans to standards and best practices. I don't necessarily think you have to go through the full certification process on an ISO standard or the NFPA 1600 or any of the other standards that are there. They're all good. They all have strengths, and there's some gaps in each one. But as we think about this area, and we're thinking about armed intruder and active shooter, it's response-oriented, not scenario-based. So we don't really care what causes the action that you must take. There are only 4 things you can do. You can lock out. You can lock your building so that the threat's outside and everybody is safe inside. Lockdown is where you're locking the building down internally with the offices and the space. And in a school environment, we say doors locked, lights out, out of sight, all pulled together to drive that process to come in place. Evacuate is obviously, you're better off being away and out, and so clearly from that standpoint. But what stairwell do you use? What direction do you go? Do we have a meeting point? Is that a secondary target? All of those are details for us to review and look at. And then finally, shelter. Shelter in place might be from a weather event or another area. But if you think about this type of worker safety that comes in place, that's not overly complicated. That's an area where individuals can understand the actions in an emergency. Now, we've shown you emergency flip books. We've talked about those. Here is a standard kind of a poster in emergency. If you're communicating, say it twice, so that you get the message out. Lock down, secure the perimeter. Lock out, secure the perimeter. If you've got a paging system, if you've got a messaging, you can come up with your own messages that you would come together. But the idea of creating it simply and understanding. Also, you'll notice that in this particular phrasing, there's no, code yellow, code orange. Well, people can get confused on what those things mean. The more specific that you can give direction, the better you will be in those types of areas. So I wanted to point this out as you think about how you communicate your plans to your employees. It would become a little easier in understanding. Now, the details of the plan then can vary as you come together. As you look at each of those, you want to document. Here's an excerpt out of a plan, and if an armed intruder is on the premise, the goal will be to get the employees to a safe place. I mean, that's easily understood. Depending on where they're located, at the time the alarm is sounded, the response may vary. Some may be able to evacuate. Some may have to lock down within the organization. And then identify, notify the office or wherever you report in this area. If there are communications and walkie-talkies, we're finding in many of the buildings the cell communication is not good. So you need to, know your building better than anyone else. Will cell phones be an effective backup for the phone system and the paging? If not, then the radios as you would come together. You would then give clear information out. Someone needs to immediately alert 911. We did an exercise of an active shooter in a bank last month with a large bank. We brought their incident response team together along with their crisis management team and went through a tabletop exercise geared around making decisions and what has to be dealt with in that environment. as you look at it. By the way, you can find, if you would like to do a similar exercise within your organization, one of the things that we played at the point when we had phone calls being made to 911, publicly available now is the 911 tape from the security officer at the FedEx facility in Kennesaw, Georgia, who was shot. By the way, he has survived multiple surgeries by the attack that occurred there at the FedEx location. When you listen to that call, it's about 4 minutes in length, you get a real feeling for the confusion that takes place, the panic, the emotion that's involved. And if you're doing an exercise with your team, I would recommend playing that 4 minutes of audio tape, because that will put people into a different position of understanding that actions need to be taken and what must occur at that point in time. Your plans would vary. This is just an example of some level of detail that you needed to have and put into it, and we can certainly go into significantly more detail with it. If you want to think about this, there are really 3 scenarios that you would discuss for active shooter. The intruder is outside and the employees are outside. By the way, that is the area that's almost never tested. In a school situation where you'd have children on the recess period of time or out on the sports field. Think about your office. Are people eating outside at a picnic table? Are they coming in and out of the building in those areas? So what is it that you want employees to do if the intruder is outside and the employees are outside? And the answer there is to move away from the building, move away from the intruder. It's a lifeboat strategy, if you think of it. Disney does a wonderful job at the theme parks, and if there's an event that's occurring at a Disney park, then the staff takes the guests to the park and moves them away from the incident. And if we're teaching children about it, we talk about their teacher or their counselor is their lifeboat. So you stay with your lifeboat and move away. The second is the intruder is inside and the employees are inside. Well, that's a lockdown. You want to try to create barriers to make it more difficult for the intruder to get to your people. In an academic environment, the best practices and standard is that all classrooms should lock from the inside, so that they should remain locked during the school day. So between breaks, you open the door, the students come and go, but they're locked. Think about your office. How can we've gone to cubicles and open floor plans. Are there areas where you can move your employees to put them behind a locked door to provide some barrier to slow down the intruder to buy that time for the police to arrive? And then last, if the intruder is outside and the employees are inside, well, this is a lockout. You want the building locked and no one comes in until the police arrive. So as you think about your plans, these are the level of plans that you need to focus on as you put those descriptions. But we've been talking about this from what are we doing in the incident that the active shooter is there? What are we doing when the armed intruder is sighted? Well, one of the things we want you to think about is that this behavioral risk area. This is probably the area that's going to do you the most good, buy you the most time, and reduce the exposures and threats to your people instantly in the area. 78% of the school shooters felt bullied or threatened. And we've shared a lot of statistics around this area with you, but there are 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually in the United States. There are 2.1 million episodes of bullying in the United States annually. Well, that's 4 million times a year. When you think about that and think about the numbers per day that occur somewhere, when Shipsaw said that somewhere this is happening, that's a guarantee. You need to be able to react before this event escalates from a behavior of concern to a violent act. And that's really where the behavioral threat risk assessment comes in. So as you're thinking about your planning today, this is the standards and best practices that I'd like you to focus on. We can talk about, cameras, and we can talk about automatic door locks, and we can talk about security guards, and we can talk about all those things. And yes, they're needed. Firestorm designs those types of plans for organizations. But having a plan, a policy around how you do this, and I've got the word student there, but it could be easily the word employee, and how they make decisions. What are the warning signs? Having a behavioral risk assessment team within your organization, an HR professional, someone from security or a supervisor or a manager. We recommend that you have at least 3 people on your assessment team. Those individuals would want to be trained on what their roles and responsibilities are. You do an initial investigation of, is this just a minor event, or is it major? If you're seeing that there is something substantive there, then there's a level 1 and a level 2 steps. The level 2 may even involve bringing in an outside professional, like a forensic psychologist. We worked with on a regular basis in the hospitality industry, where we've had threats that have been made by employees, and bringing in professionals to ascertain, is this person a risk to themselves or others? So you have your own internal resources, your external, the training, the monitoring, and the case management, and I would add to this list the anonymous reporting. The case management is, if you feel an individual has potential to be a risk to themselves or others, you need to follow them for their entire career within your firm. This is not something that you can, well, it didn't happen, so we don't have to do anything else. This is a warning sign, and we see a return to those behaviors on a regular basis. The types of threats vary, and obviously the highest concern we have is the direct threat. That's the threat that identifies a specific act against a specific person, delivered in a clear, plausible, explicit manner, and I would add, in many times, it's geared toward a particular date. I'm going to come bring a gun tomorrow, and I'm going to shoot that guy. Now you've got a time and what they're going to do and how they're going to carry it forward to be carried on. An indirect threat is a little harder to tell. It's unclear. It might be ambiguous with it. There's some implied, but it's phrase suggesting a violence could occur. The difference here between it and the direct is they're not stating that it will in fact occur. A veil threat is just strongly implies, but not implicitly, that there's violence. And a conditional threat, a threat is seen as an extortion. If I don't get my way, I'm going to do this other thing. The key combination with all of those elements is there's a threat. If you have a concern that an employee has a potential orientation to create an act of violence, to make a threat, then you need to take action. You need to go through a behavioral threat assessment and develop your plans. Now, plans can vary in level of specificity and how you look at the threat levels, moving from a low to a medium to a high, and you see the descriptions here. We would call this an event activation matrix, and it would help your behavioral threat assessment team to ascertain what they need to do at each one of these steps. If you take action at the low point, there is a significant potential of reducing it so it never gets to that high. That last line almost always requires involving law enforcement. If we've gotten to that level, our behavioral threat assessment, our security plans, our training, our process hasn't worked, because we now are at a point where the individual feels that only a violent act can be dealt with and done at this point. So I want to encourage you to think about behavioral threat risk assessment, and if you need any assistance in that area, let us know, and we certainly would be glad to help you. So the other thing I want to leave you with today is, and I'm not trying to be presumptuous by quoting me at this point, but I am reasonable as we would do it. Social media, you're going to find that in many, many cases, these threats are documented there. That information is out in the public domain. And if you think about a general who's running a military operation, they want to know where the enemy is, where are they located, what's their concentration, what is their intent, what actions do we need to take. In your business, social media will give you that insight in a great many cases. All of the individuals that had perpetrated the events that we just discussed at the beginning of this webinar had been on social media, and that was documented there and it was not in private, password-protected areas. It was in the public area. So if a threat is directed toward your organization and it was known, wouldn't you want to know it? And so that's why it becomes so very important. Now, the picture that you see here is a gun, and I apologize by the language that you see here. And there are a variety of different ones. The bottom two are related, the top two are separate. But these are postings that were out on the Internet related to particular areas. But I want to take 2 minutes to tell you about the picture with the young man with the gun in the bottom right. We monitor social media for clients both in the education marketplace as well as in the general business market to find out what's going on. And schooling gun is one of those phrases. When you think about monitoring, you want to monitor streams, phrases, and words. And as you put those together, you can design a comprehensive plan. Social media just isn't for marketing and driving sales of your business, and it certainly does that. And most of you may have marketing departments that are doing the monitoring, but they're not monitoring for these types of things, and they're not prepared with an alert system that would drive it. So Karen Mazzullo, who is the Firestorm EVP for Social Media Risk, saw the picture in the bottom right with the young man, and then saw comments from other students on Twitter about this particular person, and started drilling down within that and found a teacher's name mentioned and the word calculus. And so she was able to understand that this must have occurred in a math class teaching calculus in a high school in North Carolina as she researched the teacher's name. It was along the coast of North Carolina, and so she contacted the principal of that school, sent them the picture of the student and the postings by other students within that principal's school, and said, look, this could be a hoax, it might not be real, this is not, I can't guarantee you that this is going to occur, but we thought you would just want to know. The principal was very thankful and appreciated what Karen had done, obviously took the appropriate disciplinary actions, but he then shared with Karen that the thing that disappointed him the most was all the students that were aware of it and were posting about it, none of them had come forward to tell the school that this was occurring or had occurred. And that really bothered him because they've been running a see something, say something campaign for over a year and a half. So in thinking about this, it comes back to that word preparedness and creating a culture within your organization. Obviously, adults may be more aware and would come forward if they had seen a gun associated with it. But those behaviors of concern are much lower levels. And just knowing that there's something wrong and something's occurring will give you the difference so that you're not having to wait until the gun is at work and you're having to deal with the impacts associated with it. So when you think about monitoring, you want to be able to have a system that gives you alerts in real time. You want to be able to look at conversation maps. What are people talking about related to the company? You want to be able to customize this to fit what's going on and the issues that are around it so that you know multiple users within your systems, looking at this whole sentiment, the streams, the phrases, and the words. When you're thinking about this, you monitor a stream. That's a whole series of phrases, maybe 10 phrases, 3 words per phrase, to understand what's going on with it, and it becomes an area. You establish this in advance so that you have a baseline, so that when suddenly there starts to be a trend spike or an additional set of comments, now you know that there's something going on within your organization, and you know that you now need to take an action associated with it. We'll talk about this more in other webinars, but I wanted to bring you back to armed intruder and active shooter. The student in Seattle used pepper spray. We're not trying here to teach you karate chops or diamond formations to enter a building. We're very fortunate in America to have police who will run toward the gunfire that would respond. Our goal for you is that you can create an environment where we can identify these behaviors of concern, take the appropriate action, get the individual's help before it rises to the level that we must intervene. If you'd like to have an assessment of your business continuity plan or to talk about workplace violence or armed intruder or active shooter or planning or exercising or behavioral threat assessment, give us a call. If you want an assessment of your business continuity plan, this program is being underwritten by the Rochester Business Alliance so that you can have that available to you at no cost. It's a $2,500 assessment. Just be sure to mention the Rochester Business Alliance in order to have that done. We had some questions that occurred today, and I don't think we'll have time to get to those as we wrap up our broadcast today, but we will reach out to you individually to try to answer those questions directly one-on-one as we go forward. So Chip, thanks for being a part of what we had today. Do you have any comments or observations you want to add to our discussion?
Thank you, Jim. As always, really valuable information. I am sitting here thinking about one question. My experience with law enforcement often is that they respond to a direct threat, that they see something that's criminal behavior and they'll jump on it. Any suggestions for our members? We're in the area that you've been talking about, which is before the violence actually occurs. Any ideas about how you generate the level of concern that people might have within the company with the outside responders?
Obviously, confidentiality to everyone so that there's an environment that they feel safe to come forward and share the information. You will have to do your own investigation. If you're looking for a standard on how to do that, ASIS, the Security Association, has a great 20-step program. It's the standard and best practice on how an investigation should take place that you would do internally. Before you confront the individual, obviously you'd want to talk to workers and supervisors in the area to get a better understanding of what's moving forward. Understanding what Tier 1 and Tier 2 behaviors are will clearly guide you in that process. And then if you feel that there's a significant concern, your EAP program in some cases may well have some counselors that could be of assistance in this area, recognizing that there are limitations that occur within that process, so you may need to seek that external resource. I would recommend that you start identifying a forensic psychologist in your area prior to the event occurring so that if you do have one that would arise to carry forward. Also, that when you talk to the individual involved, we want to make that as least threatening as possible. You don't want to get them into a small room where they could feel confronted or confined. In doing this at a hotel, it was done in an unoccupied ballroom with the HR professional and an outside resource, sitting down and talking with the person. There comes a time when you have to make those decisions and move forward as you look at it. So think about those types of areas, and that's why planning this out in advance makes such a big difference. So, Chip, I think you're right. There's the direct response. You call 911, you're going to get help for those direct threats. It's the other steps, recognizing it and talking about it, training supervisors, training coworkers, what behavior to look for, and then start to share that in a way. Anonymous reporting works. If you don't have anonymous reporting in your organization, it's something you should strongly think about. If you'd like to watch this webinar again or to have someone else in your organization do it, you can go to firestorm.com. You can register for future webinars, or you can watch any of the ones that have been recorded before. If you've got questions, please drop us a note at webinars@Firestorm, or give us a call at 800-321-2219. So until next month, we wish you a great summer and great weather. Rochester is spectacular in July, so I think you've got the good weather coming. So Chip, thanks for being a part of this. Bill, we appreciate your help in pulling all this together. And until next time, Jim Satterfield, have a great summer, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.